You're listening to the Plant-Based Diet Podcast, where we talk about all things plant-based. I'm Esther Garfin, the host of this show and founder of Alternative Food Network. Join me and my amazing array of guests who are a mix of healthcare professionals, industry executives, and people with an interesting story to tell about their plant-based journey. Let us help you with your journey, wherever you're at, to learn the what, why, and how to eat plant-based. Today, I'm chatting about cellular meat with the co-founder of Evolved Meats, John Cappucciti. You might be wondering why I'm doing an episode about cellular meat for a show that's all about plant-based eating. Well, A, I actually think food tech is pretty cool, and B, there are a number of reasons why a person today would be plant-based, such as health, sustainability, and animal welfare reasons. So I was wondering, would someone's decision to eat plant-based change if the meat was no longer a product of animal farming, but rather cultivated meat, for example? Is cultivated meat even meat? I hope you'll find this food tech episode interesting, and I'd love to know if there are any other topics you'd like me to cover this season, so please feel free to send an email to info@alternativefoodnetwork.com and let me know. Now, before we get started, I'd like to thank Prolon, a presenting sponsor of the show. In some previous episodes, I mentioned that I've been using Prolon's intermittent fasting bar and their fasting shake in order to achieve a fasting window of 15-16 hours between dinner and when I eat the next day. I also tried the Prolon Reset, which is a one-day fasting kit that allowed me to fast with food. Now, you're probably wondering how that's possible. Prolon is precision nutrition technology clinically proven to keep you in a fasting state while nourishing your body with food. I also really want to mention Prolon's L spread, which is part of the Prolon Everyday line. It's an almond and cocoa spread, and it's absolutely delicious. If you'd like to try Prolon, or perhaps want to send someone a gift, they're offering the Plant-Based Diet listeners a 15% discount using promo code AFN15. Just click the link in the episode description and type in code AFN15 to get 15% off your order. If you use the link, we may receive a small commission from your purchase. And now for my guest today. John Cappucciti is the co-founder of Evolved Meats. Prior to Evolved, John was the director of the University of Waterloo's Velocity Incubator and the Velocity Core Fund and Health Tech Fund. He's also a former management consultant with the Boston Consulting Group. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you very much for having me, Esther.
So I've been wanting to do an episode like this for quite some time now. I do love food tech. So I thought a good way to start this episode about cellular meat would be to ask you more generally, what is cellular food? And then more specifically, what is cultivated meat?
Cellular food and cultivated meat have significant overlap. But when you look at meat as a category, it's probably been the most successful product category of the 20th century. But with that success has come significant detriment to the environment. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or land usage or even antibiotic creation that's then funneled into the animal agriculture system. So what cellular food and cultivated meat hopes to do is to create an alternative to the existing farming and agriculture practices that exist to provide meat to people for consumption and do it in a more humane fashion. So what we do with cultivated meat specifically is we start with a small biopsy from an animal. We then take those cells, we feed them everything that they're used to seeing within the body of the animal, grow them in tanks, and then kind of create the cuts of meat that people know and love directly from those cells, and using, again, only materials that the cells would expect to see in the living animal body.
So just to be very clear, because when I first heard about this stuff, is it meat? Is it actually meat?
It is actually meat similar to what's actually from the animal body and what we get directly from animals.
Okay, so one day down the road, when this is readily available, let's say for religious reasons, people who are kosher or halal or whatever, they're going to have certification on this. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's actually been some work on that front already. I believe there was one of the largest kosher certification granting groups has already specified that cultivated meat is kosher. And I believe one of the largest halal bodies, I'm not sure what the title would specifically be, that grant that designation, has already outlined a process for cultivated meat to be classified as halal.
And for clarity, I've read about a bunch of terms. There's lab grown meat, there's cellular meat, there's cultivated meat, sustainable protein, which can include meat. Are they all the same thing?
Yes, lab grown meat catches headlines. So you see that more in, I guess, pop culture and news. But the FDA and USDA recently approved two products for sale in the United States. And the labeling on the product was cell cultivated meat. So that's actually the term currently being used.
So, what are the environmental benefits of cultivated meat compared to conventional meat production and farming?
Sure. So when you think of conventional meat production, over the last 50 or 60 years, there was a key problem to solve was how can you increase the amount of meat that's just produced at large and then distributed. So you have these incredibly large, sophisticated, and complicated supply chains that have developed around that. Unfortunately, one of the byproducts of all of that scale up has been the treatment of the animals along the way. In a lot of ways, it hasn't kept up with what I think people would hope would have occurred there because it didn't make for the cheapest possible product at the end. So animals, obviously, in addition to growth hormone, antibiotics, and unnatural living conditions, are treated in a fairly tough way. But as consumers, obviously, we've looked past a lot of that, I guess, because it's become so second nature to us. And as a process of that, obviously, you need a ton of land. You need to kind of feed those animals. Most of them are eating soy. So large parts of like the Amazon are currently being cut down for food for pig production and all of these incredible challenges that have amounted to our existing food system. What cell cultivated meat hopes to do is to create a process that is over 90% more sustainable on water usage, greenhouse gas emission, and like significantly more beneficial towards the humane treatment of animals. So instead of actually raising animals just for slaughter, which is like almost as utilitarian as it gets, we're hoping that by taking a small biopsy, even at a semi-regular interval, you'll be able to take just that set of cells and not harm the animal at all, and then kind of recreate all of the cuts we've all become accustomed to, all the cuts of meat and all the products that we're used to, without ever having to harm the animal or have to have the animals go through that same process of growth in really confined spaces, antibiotics, hormones, and all of these things. So we think it brings a more natural outcome to the animal side, the environmental side, and then even from a human side, kind of leveraging technology.
Have there been any projections made on the percentage reduction of farming animals or animals that you need to grow for food as a result of, let's say, the growth of this area?
All the numbers around meat are huge. Like you're looking at over 500 million tons of meat produced a year between meat and fish. And when you kind of break that down into an animal number, like you're looking at over 70 billion livestock animals per year are produced just for food. And the number for fish is much more difficult to come across, but the assumptions are somewhere between 1 to 2 trillion fish. Every single year are kind of caught and then used as food for us. So right away from that sheer scale, you can kind of determine like just removing a number of those animals out of the system would be significantly better for the earth. But you're also looking at about 40% of the world's arable land is currently being used either for livestock or for the food for livestock. So again, as our planet's not getting any bigger, the amount of pressure we're kind of putting on it through this whole process is just compounding. We need some way to reduce like these numbers, and I think it's something around 14 or 15% of greenhouse gases currently. With cell cultivated meat, nobody's been able to do a full life cycle analysis, again, because the industry is so early, but the anticipation is that we'll be able to kind of meet the world's needs on a protein level by reducing emissions, energy usage, water usage, and everything by over 90%. But again, it has to be proven out.
Right. So where are we at now with cellular meat?
The reality is we're still very early. So if you look at the products people typically eat, for just like a really reductive sense, let's look at it just as like ground meat products and whole cut products. We're still trying to learn how to make ground meat products. So what's happening with a lot of groups right now is they're taking a small amount of cells, mixing it with plant-based proteins, something on the order of like 5% cells to 95% plant protein, to create ground meat analogs. And with that, you like your burgers, your sausages, your chicken nuggets, those types of products. And that's one, we think over the next 10 years, that's really where a lot of the focus is going to be. Because the challenge of growing cells at such a large scale, it was the first time this is being done in history. Like when you think of the pharmaceutical industry, they don't actually use cells in the final product. They generally use the things that cells produce. Now we're actually trying to cultivate and use the cells themselves, which is a vastly different challenge. And in solving that, we think we'll be able to kind of move towards ground products and eventually increase the amount of the cellular component of those products. The challenge that will occur probably throughout the 2030s and 2040s is how do we really make whole cut products that are 100% cell-based? And the reason that becomes incredibly important is twofold. One, if you think of it from a consumer acceptance side, people don't see ingredient labels on whole cut products they buy. Like when you buy steak, you get steak. It's not steak with a bunch of stuff in it. So understanding how to recreate whole cuts of meat directly from cells and only using cells, we think is going to be a huge proof point for the regular consumer. The second thing is going to be on the nutrition side. By understanding what the proteomic composition is, or like what the protein composition is for different cuts of meat, the only way you'll be able to completely replicate that is if you're able to use cells alone and the things that cells produce. Right now, a lot of companies talk about the amino acid structures or amino acid profiles of their products, and that's because they're mixed with so many plant proteins, but they're not necessarily complete proteins that are entirely bioavailable in the way that we would expect. So we think those are going to be the big challenges coming in the next wave, but this first wave, like I said, is going to be a lot of ground products.
And what does your company do right now?
We, I think, are the leaders in being able to create whole cut products directly from cells. So we're able to actually recreate muscle fibers exactly as they are in the animal body. And then what happens is, so when you look at a muscle fiber, there's two key components. You have the cells, and then cells produce their own natural scaffolding called ECM. We're the only group in the world, we think, that could produce ECM at the levels that cells do actually in the body. So we actually grow from the muscle fibers up.
Wow. So are you at this point able to produce a cut of meat?
So we're working with different partners around the world. So to produce a cut of meat, cells have to do two things. You have to grow them, which is one of the things we've said. You also have to be able to differentiate them properly to muscle cells and fat cells and everything else that you need. The process to do that differentiation is still very early for a lot of companies, but what we are able to do is actually to do the differentiation with some of the different cells we get from partners. And with the right cells, we can actually assemble whole cuts of meat that are only the cells.
Wow. But at the current time, there's no cellular meat in the food supply, is
No.
there?
No. There's right now there are only 3 locations in the world where you can actually get cellular meat or cell cultivated meat. One is in a restaurant in Singapore. I believe it's once a week. And there are 2 locations in the United States. One is in Washington, D.C. The other is in San Francisco. And I believe the one in San Francisco is once a month. And the one in Washington, D.C. is, I think, once a week or once a month as well. So it's an incredibly hard problem.
Just yesterday, I saw a headline, a bilateral deal with Israel could fast-track UK cultivated meat approval. Mm-hmm. So do you think things will start to happen soon, or is it still a long road?
I think there's a really good quote from another founder for a company that's quite a bit further along. It said cell cultivated meat could be regulated in every single country in the world, and it wouldn't change the amount of cell cultivated meat currently for sale.
Okay, got it.
And I think that's at least directionally correct.
Okay. So what do you see happening in the next 10 years?
Cell-cultivated meat's been around for about 10 years, give or take, maybe 8 or 9. The challenge for those first companies was that they had no idea what they had to solve for, and they had to kind of create their whole supply chains. And now what you're seeing 8 to 10 years later is different companies are springing up trying to solve unique point solutions for different parts of that supply chain. I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see an integration of some of those point solutions that are going to be best in class with some of those earlier companies. And I think we'll be able to move towards larger volumes of product that can be sold. To what magnitude, I'm not sure. I think we're still a long way away. For cell-cultivated meat to actually make a dent, I think you need, or in the entire food supply chain, I think you need to look at what food companies are currently structured like. So when you look at a company, there's two general cost buckets, fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs are like your plant and all the machinery you have to buy and all of that. Variable costs could be like the number of people you have working and things that you can kind of change along the way. Food companies are huge fixed cost businesses, and they need a lot of volume. To kind of break the food system, we need to find a way to generate enough cultivated meat where demand kind of breaks that machine, where those big, heavy fixed costs end up becoming a burden rather than an advantage. So in order to do that, you're probably on a time scale of a couple of decades. I think that's probably realistic. But I've read about the death of plant-based meat and cultivated meat and everything multiple times in Bloomberg and these other things. And there was, I think it was...
There's no death in plant-based eating. I can tell you that.
Yeah. There was, I think Oscar Wilde said the rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where we are today.
Okay. And if someone wants to take a look at what your company is doing, what's your website?
Sure. It's just www.itsevolved.com.
So itsevolved.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Well, great. I wasn't sure how early we were in the process, but clearly we're still quite early. But nonetheless, I am happy that we did this episode because now I have a better idea, at least, of what it is. So thank you very much. If this is still going on in 10 years, we'll have you back.
Sounds good. I'll put it in my calendar.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Esther.
I hope you found this informative. I'd really appreciate if you could rate the show, subscribe to it, or leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. If you're on social media, please follow us at Alternative Food Network on Facebook and Instagram. And we also publish a monthly newsletter that includes plant-based recipes, videos, and our latest podcasts. You can subscribe by going to our website at alternativefoodnetwork.com and click the subscribe button. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, Prolon. Until next time, thanks for listening.